All right, let's dive into one of the most spectacular, most expensive, and, let's be honest, most embarrassing failures in all of maritime history, the story of the Swedish warship Vasa.
I mean, that's the real question here, isn't it? It just sounds impossible. This wasn't some perfect storm or a crazy naval battle. This was a catastrophe happening in slow motion, in broad daylight, with everyone watching. So, how on earth did it happen?
That's it, 20 minutes. That's how long the Vasa, the absolute pride of the Swedish Navy, actually managed to stay afloat. It's not even enough time to get out of the harbor. The speed of this failure is just staggering.
And that's how far it got. Less than a single mile. It sank before it even really had a chance to be a ship. You know, when you put that time and that distance together, it tells you one thing very, very clearly. Something was fundamentally, catastrophically wrong from the very first moment.
So let's paint a picture. The date is August 10th, 1628. Stockholm is basically having a citywide party. The Vasa, this incredible symbol of Sweden's military power, is about to set sail. You've got foreign diplomats, city officials, and thousands of regular people all gathered to watch this massive display of strength.
But the way it actually sank was just shockingly simple. There was no huge storm, no enemy attack. The ship catches a light breeze and just tips over. It rights itself for a second, but then a second gust hits, and that's all it took. The real killer was the water pouring in through the lower gun ports, which, by the way, were wide open to show off all the cannons. And just like that, it was over in minutes.
Okay, so that leads us to the first big piece of the puzzle. The ship itself was an engineering nightmare. It was designed to look powerful and scary, but in making it that way, they built it to be completely, totally unstable.
And to get why, we need a quick, super simple physics lesson on something called metacentric height. Just think of it as a ship's ability to right itself if it gets pushed over. A high number is great, that means you're stable. A low, or even negative number, means the slightest nudge could send you rolling. And the Vasa's number? It was dangerously, fatally low.
So let's see what that looks like in practice. Over here on the left, you've got the basics of a good, stable warship. It's wide with a low center of gravity. And on the right, you've got the Vasa. It was too narrow for how tall it was, its center of gravity was way, way too high, and it had nowhere near enough ballast, that's the heavy stuff in the bottom of the hull, to even try to fix these problems.
So why was it so top-heavy? Well, here are the culprits. The king himself demanded 2 full gun decks, stacked with 64 enormous bronze cannons. Then, for decoration and propaganda, they stuck over 700 heavy carved sculptures way up high on the ship. All that weight, just piled up on top, created a ship that was practically begging to tip over. This chart really puts it in perspective. The ship had about 120 tons of stone for ballast, but as you can see, modern estimates show it would have needed way, way more than that just to have a fighting chance. But here's the catch. If they added more ballast, the lower gun ports would have been below the waterline, making the cannons useless. It was a completely impossible situation to be.
So, yeah, the design was a total disaster. But that's not even the whole story. You see, the process of actually building the Vasa was just as broken. This wasn't just a design failure. It was a total organizational failure.
It was just one thing after another. The king kept pushing for more guns, a bigger, grander ship. The builders didn't have blueprints. They were working from experience. And get this, that meant different teams built the left and right sides of the ship, and they didn't even match. The ship was literally lopsided. Then, the master shipbuilder died halfway through, leaving his less experienced crew to finish. But the most damning part, they knew something was wrong.
And this right here is the smoking gun. Before the launch, they did a stability test. They had 30 guys run from one side of the deck to the other, and the ship rocked so badly they had to stop the test. They were afraid it was going to capsize right there at the dock. They had undeniable proof that the ship was a death trap, and they launched it anyway.
So after this huge, very public disaster, you'd expect heads to roll, right? Well, an official inquiry was held, and not a single person was punished. Why? Well, how can you blame the shipbuilders when they were just following the direct orders of the king himself? The failure was baked right into the system of power.
Now, it's really easy for us, with all our modern knowledge, to look back and judge them. But we have to zoom out and remember that the people who built the Vasa were operating in a completely different world.
This is such a crucial idea to grasp. Shipbuilding in the 1620s was more of an art than a science. It was based on tradition, experience, and rules of thumb that had worked for smaller, simpler ships. The Vasa was a leap into the unknown, and they simply didn't have the math or physics to know just how big of a risk they were taking.
And this timeline just makes that knowledge gap crystal clear. The Vasa sinks in 1628. But it took another 100 years before the science of naval architecture really came into its own, giving engineers the tools, like metacentric height, to calculate a ship's stability before you put it in the water. The builders of the Vasa? They were essentially flying blind. But this is where the story takes this amazing turn. For 333 years, the Vasa was nothing more than a symbol of failure. But after it was raised from the seabed in 1961, its story completely transforms.
So the ship's first life was a cautionary tale, a lesson in what not to do.
But its second life? Oh, it has become one of the world's most valuable living laboratories. It's an unprecedented time capsule of the 17th century.
And the effort to save it has been this monumental scientific project. Thanks to the cold, low salt water of the Baltic Sea, it was raised almost perfectly intact. Then came decades of constantly spraying it with a special wax to replace the water in the wood. And now there's an ongoing project to replace thousands of old iron bolts that are starting to corrode. See, the ship isn't a dead object. It's a dynamic system that scientists are managing every single day.
And because of all that incredible work, the Vasa is like an open book. We can study how these massive ships were built by hand, see the direct effects of political pressure on a big project, and understand how materials break down over centuries. We've even created a complete digital twin of the ship so we can analyze its failure with a precision its builders could never have dreamed of.
And that's really the big takeaway here. The Vasa didn't sink because of one single mistake. It sank because of a total systemic failure. You had a flawed design, which came from a flawed process, happening at a time when people just didn't have the scientific tools to see the disaster that was right in front of them. Every single part of the system led to that sinking.
And that leaves us with a pretty chilling thought, doesn't it? The Vasa is a story about human ambition getting way ahead of our technical know-how, and about political pressure ignoring obvious warning signs. It really makes you wonder, what complex, high-stakes projects happening today might be repeating the exact same mistakes, just waiting for a light gust of wind?